So I kind of jumped in here last minute because Jim Blaze had to go fill in for somebody at his other job, right? So I understand some people had questions about food labels, and the idea that I originally had for this session, and I told Kathy we can do another session too if you want this summer, is on food modification. And this is kind of fun because everybody wants to do it, but nobody wants to mess up a recipe or, and have it taste awful. And I joke about everybody's had those cookies that taste like hockey pucks because they take out all the sugar and they take out all the butter and they don't know what to put in it and it tastes awful. Luckily, this is where I tell my students, this is where I encourage the world of Google. You can Google anything to find like a replacement for sugar or replacement for bad fat to good fat. So I thought we could talk about that, or we could do food labels, or we could start here and see where we finish up. Whatever you guys want. What are you all mostly interested in?
I like the substitution.
I like the substitution, we'll start there. That's not what I thought I heard you say at first. I'm like, I gotta have her say that again. Same ending. Okay, so let's talk about, make sure my phone is off. Let's talk about food modification. And how I usually start with my students is, we start with the main groups of food, right? So, and we also have what's called food day, right? In my class, the very last class before the final exam, we have food day, and we all have a really nice buffet dinner, or lunch. I have a 1 o'clock class. I'm all over the place, but usually I have a 1 o'clock and I have evening classes. So everybody signs up. We start out. I write on the board: appetizers, entrees, salads, and desserts. And I minimize the desserts. I only allow a few desserts because desserts are supposed to be minimized. They're not supposed to be every day, right? And they pick a recipe. They're supposed to pick a recipe that they like and modify it and bring it in. And who's the most critical of a modified recipe is the originator, right? It's the person who's made it for 20 years. It's really fun if you take a recipe that's been in your family or one you really love, and you're like, oh, I don't want to modify this because it's so good as it is. But everybody else in the room almost, Kathy, where's Kathy? I see, there she is. This Kathy, because I'm picking on her because Kathy took my class, food modification. Remember? Everybody else is thrilled to death with these recipes. Occasionally the originator's like, it's not as good as the original one, or it's not as good as the fatty one, right, Kathy? Yeah. But wouldn't you say most people thought it was good? The recipes were really good. And we're not trying to make drastic changes. That's the problem. Everybody tries to eliminate something. You can't eliminate butter out of a cookie. You just can't, and expect it to taste decent. I think the easier rule of thumb is, can you eat a cookie that's this big versus the one at Panera that's this big? That's the problem. We buy this thing and we eat it instead of making that last 2 days, right? It's just not good. So we start out on the board with grains because they're easy. We do fats, protein or meat. You can call it whatever you want, because sometimes we replace meat with other protein sources or decrease. People don't think, oh, I gotta change something. You don't have to eliminate meat. I have decreased meat in almost every recipe I ever make, to a point where my boyfriend goes, is there meat in here? He goes, I taste it, but I'm not really chewing on it, right? It's in there, but I might use a ½ pound instead of 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. Chili's a great one to modify. You can't, as long as there's meat in there, somewhere in there, it has a flavor, you can do it. There's also things like soy sauce and Worcestershire sauce. People don't realize those make great additions to soups and stews, and people don't really know what is in there, but it really makes it hearty and give it more flavor. So I think we live in a world where we're terrified to use spice and herbs because the fear is hot, right, or heat, or spicy. So let's see, grains, fats. Any recipe that already starts out with veggies is already pretty healthy. So what I tell people there is, if you have a salad that's already healthy, make it healthier by adding more color. So if you have a really good salad, add black olives, green olives, and different colored peppers, tomatoes. They have red carrots now, and they have different colored cauliflower. Color of the rainbow is really what you want in fruits and veggies because it's the antioxidants. You cannot put those antioxidants and phytochemicals in a pill. You just can't. We're discovering new ones all the time. All right, so what we start out with, grains would be the favorite of people, of course, is pasta and rice. And I love it. I always get some really lovely person who's from one of the islands, right, or from Mexico, who says, I would love to change how much rice we eat, right, in my family, but it's so cultural. So for those people, I said, well, can you modify? Can you make it half and half, like every other rice? What are you gonna make instead of white rice? What could you make?
Brown rice.
Well, I was actually staying with the rice theme. That's a baby step, like Kathy learned, baby steps with. But yeah, you use brown rice or whole grain rice. And at first, I had this one man who was from Polynesian island, and he was like, "Oh my God!" He goes, "It tastes so different, right?" But he learned. He had every other meal, he would do the brown rice, and every other meal, of course, he did the white rice. And he also stopped doing like 4 cups. You know, if anybody follows the plate, which, you know, if anybody knows me well enough, I'm not a big fan of the USDA's. Because it's Department of Agriculture, so they're a little biased. But if you follow this, the whole point of this is grains and wheat, right? And it's veggies, fruit, and protein. Seriously, how much grains is usually on your plate? At least half, right? Especially if you do spaghetti, right, or pasta dishes. This I don't disagree with this. And they changed it from meat to protein, right, to account for vegetarians or people who don't want to eat meat all the time. So it's a little bit better than the old pyramid, but it needs a ways to go. So you're right. I would go with whole grain or brown rice, right? Much better for you. Pasta, how many of you eat whole grain pasta now anyway? It's gotten to a point where it's been out long enough. At first people are like, oh, it doesn't taste right. I don't know how to cook it. Right now there's a knack to it. It does take a little longer to cook depending on the thickness of it. But use the whole wheat pastas. And then modification. You know, that's a huge word in nutrition. Is how do you modify? And people don't think that way, right? I'm a big fan of serving the plates and taking them into the other room. I learned this from my mother-in-law, who is deceased now, but she was from Denmark, and she put everything in the kitchen so it would stay warm in a pot, and then everybody ate what was on your plate, and you went back in the kitchen, or she would bring stuff in for seconds. It slows everything down. It slows down the process, and but most Americans really don't want to modify their food intake or make better choices. You can have this, if you're going to have anything beyond your plate that's half the plate, it really should be this one, right? It's the veggies, because there's low calories, tons of fiber, and all kinds of the phytochemicals, right? Also, making a meal last 20 minutes is key. Your brain kicks in. I would joke and say, okay, Elaine, stupid, you're done eating, right? Stop. Your brain does know when you're full. Do you ever eat a really heavy meal and an hour later or half hour later you're like dying? You're like, what? Oh my God, I didn't think I ate that much. It's because you went past that mark, and you feel like you're going to regurgitate, right? Because
you don't mean to keep refilling your plate.
Right. Talk during your Yeah, don't refill. Or, and they say if you can do this, if you're still hungry, we don't want people being hungry, but slow it down. I give an extra credit homework that they can do this dinner, whatever your biggest meal of the day is, to make it last 20 minutes no matter what. And the response I get is hysterical, because they're like, oh my God, I had no idea I finished a huge meal in 7 minutes. Or they make it last 22 minutes and they're like, it's cold. I'm like, oh my God, you can't have everything, right? But they absolutely, all of them universally admit they eat less if they make it last longer. If you go back for seconds, the rule is you go back for veggies first. Then if you're still hungry, then you go back and you can have veggies and rice or whatever your grain is, right? Protein or meat should be the last one you go back for. Again, it's how do you train the family members to do that? I also am a big believer in not cooking enough meat, because meat seems to be the real culprit. There's been a lot of science behind high rates of cancer with extreme amounts of protein like we eat in this country. And don't make enough so that people have 2 or 3 servings of meat. Who's cooking? I don't know. Who's cooking the meal? I don't understand why you have to make like 13 brats or hamburgers or pieces of chicken or pork chops or whatever. You make 1 pork chop for each person at the table. If they're still hungry, they eat their rice or quinoa and their veggies, salad, whatever else you have. So it's a learning curve. I agree, it's a learning curve. Anybody have any other questions about grains they like? Replacement, Kathy mentioned quinoa. Quinoa is a seed. It's not really a grain, but it's really tasty. It's used in a lot of dishes. It can replace anything that has rice in it. As Kathy served stuffed peppers with quinoa, and no one knew. Okay, so don't tell her husband. So we're not telling him. I made him too without telling Bill, and he didn't know the difference. You know, he didn't know. If you put it on a pile on a plate, it looks a little different because it has that little tiny little tail thing. But the other trick when you're first learning to try it is make it with a low sodium chicken broth. Makes it better than water because it's a little bit of, and the low sodium, believe it, people are like, oh, why low sodium? The low sodium actually has, and I'm not a salt freak unless you have a problem with it. The reason I think people are worried about salt is high blood pressure, but we also don't eat enough potassium-rich foods. Potassium-rich foods counter sodium in our diet. But there is actually more chicken and more protein in the low sodium broths when you buy them. So I always buy the low sodium because you get more flavor to counter it. Salt adds flavor, so people like it, right? So
quinoa instead of rice, and even brown rice, quinoa is that much better than?
Well, no, I wouldn't say better than brown rice, but the difference is, which a lot of may not realize, is that this is a complete protein, which a lot of people don't realize because white rice has not much in it, I'll be honest. White rice is kind of like white bread. You heard that in the news, stay away from white things. Well, that's what they mean. White rice, white pasta, white bagels, pretzels, white sugar, right. It's white flour. That's what they're saying. There's really no nutrients in those white things, the white products, right? But when you talk about rice, pasta, any barley, millet, they have really good protein. There's 20 amino acids. 9, this is the problem, 9 are what we all knew in the world of nutrition. Is this all flashback, Kathy? She's going, oh yeah. 9 of them have to come from food. The other 11 your body can make internally, right? So you eat foods and you make those 11 amino acids. You can't make these 9. So what I actually brought for you today is this little handout I give my students on complementary protein. So if you want to eat less meats, I'm a big fan of limiting meat. There's a famous trend called Meatless Mondays. Has anybody ever heard of that one? Been around for years. Highly recommend that one. This one, I'll just pass that around if that's okay.
That was from World War II when
Yeah.
it was ration.
Okay, I didn't realize it went back that far. Yeah. Yeah, I talk about my students go, what? You want me to eat a whole day with no meat? I'm like, try it. Just try it. You'd be surprised, right? So the reason being that broccoli, let's say broccoli or a good salad will have 5 amino acids of these 9. The essential, we call essential in nutrition means your body can't make it or produce it, so it must get it from food. So when you eat broccoli with rice, you've got all 9. Rice has the others. And what I gave you there is the columns of the different protein sources that are not meats, okay? You can't pick like, if I can steal this for a second. In the grain column, you can't pick barley with rice because they're the same amino acids. But you can pick barley or rice or oats and have nuts and get all the amino acids, or leafy greens. That's why people, if you eat lots of nuts with your salad, some people like nuts in your salad, really good way to get complementary protein. So I brought that because that's a handy handout. I give that's in the handout packet my students get. Quinoa is the only source that I know of that has all 9 amino acids. And this, I'm a little torn about quinoa, and I'll tell you why. It's a wonderful food. It's got all 9 amino acids. It's wonderful if you're a vegetarian. Even soy. A lot of people have allergies to soy, though. Soy has a lot of amino acids, good for you. The problem I have here is we have third world countries and South American countries who grow quinoa are going bankrupt because what was their sole protein source, they are selling to crazy Americans because we have jumped on the quinoa bandwagon. And they're not feeding their kids their own protein source, they're selling it to America. So I'm a little torn about quinoa. Yeah, so yeah, ecologically, I want some farmers in America to try to grow it, and I think we can. I don't think it grows like rice, which you need like lots of water. I don't know how this is grown to be able to explain it, but there's been some really interesting articles that I follow on Environmental Working Group is a really good website, and saying how we are destroying the protein source of a lot of countries who do not have meat, and that's their primary. So I don't buy it often. That's me. I do buy it occasionally, but I don't eat it as a staple. Hand up or a question, or you're just thinking? Okay. But anyway, we need to get outside of this too. Not just this, but barley, millet, quinoa. Amaranth. There's all kinds of whole grains. And you can Google up how to make them, and they're all really good, whether you put them in soups. But this is how really we are meant to eat grains. It's not in whole wheat bread, right? Tons of sodium in bread. But we're not meant to eat bread or grains like that. We're meant to eat the whole grain as part of our meal. And it gives us huge amounts of fiber, right? Okay, if there's no more questions, any questions on grain, I want to move along to fats. We all know what's the healthiest fat out there. I hope you know. If for no other reason, it has over 200 phytochemicals in olive oil alone. Good olive oil, good extra virgin olive oil, right? And you need to do your homework. You can't buy the cheapest, I'll be honest, you can't buy the cheapest there is out there. You don't have to buy the most expensive. You can actually, there are websites, I can't remember the name of it. If someone reminds me, I'll find it and give it to Kathy, but where they evaluate different oils. Of course, the best come from Greece and Italy and Spain, but there's California places that make really good ones. It's not cheap. Buy a small bottle and use it for drizzling on your veggies, right? Or in your smoothie. I put mine in my smoothie, but it's really the best to cook with. Now, if you're going to bake, I always recommend this one to bake with. People freak out about it because it's a saturated fat. Oh my God, right? How much? Are you going to eat the whole bowl of brownies? I hope not, right? If you're sharing, that's the whole problem of sharing, right? Coconut oil, it's stable. It doesn't go rancid, right? You want to stay away from the stick margarines, any margarines, and you really want to stay away from, and this is the polyunsaturated, except for fish. The polyunsaturated oils are the common ones we buy thinking they're healthy because they're liquid, right? That's an old thing that started in World War II. We couldn't get butter, so that's where they made shortening, vegetable shortening, the trans fat. You want to avoid the trans fat, and you want to stay away from corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, any oil like that, because they're so unstable molecularly. They go rancid on the shelf quick, but not only that, they do it in your body. They're very unstable because they have many double bonds. So the more double bonds in a molecule, the more unstable it is, right? If you look at coconut or butter, it's very stable. It doesn't mean I want you to eat pounds and pounds of it, but it's stable because it's fully saturated. There's no double bonds, so it's very stable in your body. Less likely to cause free radical damage in your body or DNA and RNA damage. Okay. Now, fish oil is a polyunsaturated, but is that the only one that you really want to consume, the omega-3 fatty acids, because we don't eat omega-3 fatty acids in foods anymore. If you think about it, 50, 60, 100 years ago, what were cows eating? Grass. It was all grass-fed. So we got omega-3s in the meat when we ate those cows, right? Today, they're pretty much corn-based, and a lot of farmers will tell you it tastes better. That could be, but you're getting more omega-6s, which we don't need. So we don't get the omega-3s if we don't try. And the best omega-3 sources really are, besides fish, nuts and seeds. Walnuts, almonds, flax seeds, ground up flax seeds are really good put in salads or in your cereal, ground flax seeds. So protein, meat. Okay, so back to food modification. Let's take lasagna for an example, because I want to make sure we actually do a modification. Lasagna is a fun one. Mac and cheese is a fun one. Chili is a fun one. So we already talked about decreasing. A lot of recipes call for 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of meat. That's a lot of meat in a big pot. It really is. You could easily cut that in half. And if you do a food analysis, how many of you know MyFitnessPal? MyFitnessPal is an app you can put on your phone, free. Don't pay unless you really want to. It's a free app, and you can log in. You just need an email address. But you can compare. You can actually put in a recipe, plug in your recipe, and it will give you all the calories, sodium, protein, everything. And then you can modify, this is what my students do for food day. Then they put in the recipes that they modified just to compare the results. And you'll see a huge difference in calories, sodium, saturated fat. You really want to, those are the main things, sugar, calories, right? So if you're working in a cookie, you can replace some of the sugar, right, with applesauce, right? I don't really worry too much. If a recipe calls for butter, I don't really worry about it because I just say you're not eating all 24 cookies, hopefully, right? So I don't really worry about butter, right? I think the problem is modification. If we know how to modify, right? I don't worry too much when we bake. Baking is not healthy to begin with, really. We bake for treats, right? They're mostly our treats. Let's see. What a lot of people, let's take the ricotta cheese, which I hope, is there anybody who's Italian in here? I told this to one of my very good Italian friends, and he freaked out that I was going to take cottage cheese, put it in the blender, and I added the oregano and basil in the blender with the cottage cheese, you whip it up, and it gets kind of that texture. You know how this is very fine texture, but it's a little gritty? It gets almost like the ricotta. So you use that in the layer. Number one, it's a lot cheaper, and you can't tell the difference when you blend it with just don't do it in front of anybody that, you know, hide.
When you do that, Elaine, do you use the 4%?
I pretty much go with 2% on most things, yeah. I don't like most fat-free things because I joke about don't use fat-free cheese or sour cream because it bounces. Right. It just doesn't have a lot of flavor. But you can easily use 2%. And if you did 2% compared with whole milk, you'll see a huge difference in calories and fat calories. How many people like whole milk? I mean, I'll say half and half. You know, some people put half and half and really rich cheeses in mac and cheese. But you can even Google modified mac and cheese. This is a fun one. But use the stronger tasty cheeses like Parmesan. Hard, dry cheeses have less calories. So it doesn't mean you have to take out all of the cheddar, because we know cheddar is rich, right? But we know cheddar is like sinful. So use half the amount of cheddar, right? And then the other, let's say there's another cup. That cup can be a mix of ground Parmesan or mozzarella, right? Something like that. Nobody will know the wiser. And then you include like a whole grain pasta. You can also put broccoli. Broccoli is really good in mac and cheese. Again, the first time someone else might see that, they're going to go, really? It just looks different, right? But it tastes really good. So ricotta, you can change ricotta cheese. Add things like spinach and mushrooms, right? And you can leave the meat out, or you can use a ground turkey, right? Ground turkey. If you saute the turkey first, sometimes you get a little more flavor from the drippings in the pan. That'll give a little more flavor. But add things, lasagna, you can add all kinds of things in the layers and not rely so heavily on the meat. Mozzarella is usually good. I get the part skim milk mozzarella. That's fine. Again, Kathy, I don't use because it doesn't melt as nice. So use the 2%, right, or the lower fat cheeses. They melt and they really taste very similar to the whole fat ones. Does anybody have any question or a specific meal?
Well, I just was wondering, what's the difference between the ricotta, like if you use like a low fat ricotta compared to the cottage cheese?
It depends. I'd have to look at the label. I really wouldn't know. It might be okay. But most people don't like the low-fat ricotta. It's like a sin. But compare it next time. You know, when you go to the store, look at the low-fat ricotta compared with a cottage cheese, and look at a 2% cottage cheese. So, but yeah, it might be okay. Yes, Pete.
Do you have any opinions on soy meat replacements?
My biggest complaint about soy, and I know this is very controversial, but it's the soy and corn in this country is pretty much GMO, genetically modified. But I think they're fine. They're called soy crumbles. They're fine as far as a protein source. They're excellent. I don't buy them unless they're non-GMO soy or corn. But I think they're fine. They're a good protein source. So all of these things, that's kind of why I gave you that sheet, so you could see how you could make meatless meals, right, and getting all 9 essential amino acids that you need. It's easy. And eat your eggs, by the way. Eggs, you know that commercial, The Incredible Edible Egg? It truly is the most perfect food out there. Your body utilizes 99% of an egg. So enjoy it and eat the yolks. Okay, that's an old bad, unless you have a serious genetic issue with cholesterol, you can have eggs a few times a week. People freak out about eating eggs. Eat your eggs, they're good for you. Any other items with food? Has any of you modified recipes already?
One of the things I try and do is I use applesauce for
Mhm.
that.
For,
So if I'm doing
For baking?
banana bread instead
Yeah.
of oil,
Uh-huh.
put in
Mhm.
a cup of
Yeah,
the
you can do
same
half and
amount of
half, right?
applesauce.
Yep, do half and half. But choose, always go for, in every category, go for the healthiest protein, the healthiest grain, the healthiest fat that you can. That's the best advice, simple advice I could give. There's good and bad in every category. And people say, oh, well, all the bad things taste good. I think it's training our palates and learning how to cook a little bit differently, that's all. Yes?
Now, with like banana bread.
Yeah.
What flour would you recommend?
Well, cakes and breads, you got to be careful because you can't, you know, cookies are wonderful to put whole wheat. Does anybody make cookies with whole wheat flour? I do, and they get nuttier, right? You can't, it's too dense to put in cake or banana bread. You can, what I do with banana bread is you make it healthier by putting in nuts. I always put nuts in banana bread, and I put either dried cranberries or whole cranberries or raisins. And then I put like a quarter cup of ground flax seeds and leave the, and you can buy, have you seen the whole wheat, it's called whole wheat white flour. It's like, it's just ground more. It's still whole wheat, but it has the same texture as white flour. You might not notice a difference with that one. And I just throw a quarter cup or a third a cup of ground flaxseed in there just because, you know, you got a lot of, your good omega-3 fatty acids in that. Anything that's a sweet, of course, if you don't like nuts, it kind of, you know, is a problem. But if you like nuts, anytime you make a recipe with cookies, brownies, I don't know, not cake, but cookies, brownies, and they're the most common, always add nuts and a dried fruit if you can. You just beef up the phytochemical count, and maybe if they don't like them, they won't eat as many of them.
That's a backhanded strategy.
Yeah, trust me, they'll eat them. They'll just be like, my one daughter used to try to pick out the walnuts, but she just didn't like, she liked pecans, but I made them with pecans. So I would joke and say, okay, this half is the pecans and this half is the walnuts, right? They didn't complain about the raisins or cranberries, but it was the walnuts they didn't like. But you can always make something healthier, you know. I think it's just retraining how we think, right? How we think about things. So it's after 12:30. But if Kathy wants, if you all want, I can come back at some point. I brought a food label to talk about that. But I can come back another time if you want to talk about food labels.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys.